Some disappearances don't feel real at first. A girl walks away in broad daylight. A judge vanishes in the heart of a city. A man disappears under cameras and witnesses. Another predicts something impossible before he's gone. And one simply fades from the world without a trace. Each case defied logic in its own way, which made the truth harder to see. Let's uncover 5 real disappearances that sounds completely fake. Story 1. In the middle of a weekday afternoon, a 16-year-old girl stepped out of a taxi near a well-known beauty spot in Surrey. It was not remote. It was not late. People passed through the area every day. Yet from that ordinary moment, Ruth Wilson vanished so completely that even investigators later admitted the circumstances seemed almost impossible to reconcile with reality. Ruth Wilson was the eldest daughter of Ian and Nesta Wilson. When Ruth was just 3 years old, her mother died. For most of her life, Ruth was told it had been an accident. Only shortly before her disappearance did she learn the truth, that her mother had taken her own life. Friends later said this revelation deeply unsettled her. By 1995, Ruth lived with her father, her stepmother Karen, and her younger sister Jenny in Betchworth, Surrey. Both adults were teachers, active in their community, and described the home as stable and supportive. Ruth was bright, thoughtful, and creative. She loved music, played the piano and electric guitar, sang in the church choir, rang bells, and worked part-time in a music shop. At school, she was studying for her A-levels and was known as intelligent and quirky, with a close-knit circle of friends. Those who knew her said she talked about leaving home one day, but not about harming herself. On the morning of November 27, 1995, Ruth's father and stepmother left early for work. Ruth told her sister at the last moment that she would not be taking the school bus. An ex-boyfriend later stopped by and offered her a ride, which she declined. Instead, Ruth took a taxi to Dorking. Around midday, she ordered flowers for her stepmother and asked that they be delivered days later. She spent several quiet hours at the local library. Nothing appeared rushed or emotional. Later that afternoon, Ruth took another taxi, this time to Box Hill. At approximately 4:30 p.m., the driver dropped her off near a bridleway close to the Hand in Hand pub. He later said her behavior struck him as unusual. She stood still in the rain as he drove away, rather than walking off. She carried only a small bag with her personal stereo and tapes. She was dressed neatly, not for hiking or exposure. She did not appear distressed. She did not ask for help. That was the last confirmed sighting of Ruth Wilson. When Ruth did not return home, the police were contacted quickly. Searches of Box Hill began almost immediately and expanded rapidly, involving helicopters, dogs, and thermal imaging. Despite the scale of the effort, nothing was found. Days later, the flowers Ruth ordered arrived at her home with no note attached. Then, police discovered handwritten farewell letters hidden beneath bushes near Betchworth Quarry, along with empty medication packets and a bottle of alcohol. Yet despite repeated searches of the area, no physical evidence ever confirmed what happened next. This is where the case begins to sound unreal. At the time, investigators had no evidence of what happened, which is why the disappearance sounded impossible. A teenager vanished in daylight from a public place she knew well. Nobody was found. No belongings were recovered beyond what had already been left behind. No confirmed witness saw her leave the area. No proof emerged that she died, was harmed, or successfully started a new life. Police openly stated they could not rule out an accident, taking her own life, foul play, or voluntary disappearance. Each possibility existed, but none could be proven. Ruth's family publicly appealed for her to come home, saying they believed she might still be alive, but was afraid to return. Her father later wrote an open letter to her, asking her to make contact if she could. Friends remained divided, unsure whether Ruth had planned to disappear or whether someone else knew more than they had ever said. Over the years, sightings were reported, including CCTV footage of a distressed young woman resembling Ruth in a nearby town, but none were confirmed. What if Ruth expected to leave only briefly and something interrupted that plan? And what if the truth sounds fake simply because the crucial moment was never seen? Story 2. In the summer of 1930, at the height of his career, a judge stepped into the streets of New York City and was never seen again. Not in an alley, not in the dead of night, but amid restaurants, theaters, taxis, and crowds. His disappearance was so baffling that it entered the language itself as shorthand for vanishing without explanation. Joseph Force Crater was born in 1889 in Easton, Pennsylvania, the son of Irish immigrants. Intelligent and ambitious, he rose through elite institutions, graduating from Lafayette College and Columbia University before establishing himself as a lawyer in Manhattan. Crater cultivated political connections within New York's powerful Democratic circles and was deeply enmeshed in the city's social life. In April 1930, Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed him as a justice of the New York Supreme Court, a prestigious and influential position. The appointment came during a time of growing scrutiny over corruption in New York politics, particularly tied to Tammany Hall. Publicly, Crater appeared confident and successful. Privately, he was known as Good Time Joe, a man who enjoyed nightlife, showgirls, and lavish dinners, a reputation that would later complicate the search for him. In late July 1930, Crater was vacationing with his wife at their summer home in Maine when he received a phone call. He told his wife only that he needed to return to New York City to straighten those fellows out. What followed appeared deliberate but unclear. On August 6th, Crater spent the morning at his courthouse chambers, reviewing files and reportedly destroying documents. He arranged for more than $5,000 in cash to be withdrawn, a significant sum at the time. With his law clerk, he carried 2 locked briefcases to his apartment and dismissed the clerk for the rest of the day. That evening, Crater made a Broadway reservation for a show he had already seen. He then dined at a Manhattan chop house with a showgirl and a lawyer friend. When the meal ended, accounts of his departure conflicted. Some said he entered a taxi. Others said he walked away alone. From that moment forward, Joseph Force Crater vanished. Crater's disappearance did not immediately raise alarms. Days passed, then weeks. Only when he failed to appear for the opening of court did concern escalate. When police finally became involved, the case exploded into national headlines. This is where the story begins to sound unreal. At the time, investigators had no evidence of what happened, which is why the disappearance sounded impossible. A high-profile judge disappeared from one of the most populated cities on Earth. His safe deposit box was empty. His briefcases were gone, yet no crime scene existed. Nobody was found. No confirmed witness could say where he went after dinner. A grand jury heard testimony from nearly 100 witnesses and concluded they could not determine whether Crater was alive, dead, ill, murdered, or had chosen to disappear. Despite intense scrutiny, every explanation remained just that, an explanation, not proof. Rumors followed Crater for decades. His disappearance intersected with corruption scandals, organized crime figures, murdered witnesses, and political upheaval, yet none of it produced definitive answers. The case became so famous that to pull a Crater entered American slang, meaning to vanish completely. Nightclubs joked about it. Newspapers revisited it year after year. In 1939, Crater was declared legally dead. Even then, new claims surfaced decades later, including alleged deathbed confessions, none of which could be verified. Did Joseph Crater plan his disappearance carefully, or did something unexpected happen in a city that never stops moving? And if the truth vanished with him, would it always sound fake simply because no ending was ever found? Story 3. In June 2017, a man disappeared from one of Canada's largest cities during a busy summer weekend. He lived and worked in a populated neighborhood. He was known, active, and connected. In a city watched by cameras and tracked by data, his sudden absence felt impossible, as if someone had simply been erased. Andrew Kinsman was 49 years old and lived in Toronto, Ontario. He was a well-known and well-liked figure in his community, particularly in the Church Wellesley Village area. Kinsman worked as a caretaker and superintendent for the apartment building where he lived, a role that placed him in daily contact with residents. Friends described Andrew as kind, outspoken, and deeply committed to social justice. He was politically active, volunteered with local organizations, and was a visible member of Toronto's LGBTQ community. He maintained regular routines and relationships, making his sudden disappearance immediately concerning to those who knew him. There was nothing in Andrew's life that suggested he would leave without explanation. Andrew Kinsman was last seen in late June 2017. In the days that followed, messages went unanswered, appointments were missed. His absence was noticed quickly. On June 29, 2017, he was officially reported missing to Toronto police. Investigators searched his apartment and spoke with neighbors. There were no obvious signs of struggle. His personal belongings remained behind. His phone activity stopped. At first, there was no single moment that explained his disappearance. No clear crime scene, no confirmed witness, no trail leading away from the city. For weeks, investigators and the public were left with questions and no answers. At the time, investigators had no evidence of what happened, which is why the disappearance sounded impossible. Toronto is a city layered with surveillance cameras, transit records, phone data, and witnesses. Andrew lived and worked in a dense urban area, yet no footage immediately showed where he went. No credible sightings explained his movements. No digital trail told a clear story. As the weeks passed, police began to connect Andrew's disappearance with that of another missing man, Salim Sen. This led to the creation of a dedicated task force known as Project Prism. Investigators revisited earlier missing persons cases involving men from the same neighborhood, cases that had previously gone unresolved. Slowly, the idea that Andrew's disappearance was isolated became harder to support. Still, for months, there was no proof of a crime, no remains, no confirmed suspect, just absence. In January 2018, police arrested Bruce MacArthur, a landscaper who had worked across Toronto for years and had access to multiple properties. What followed shocked the city. Investigators discovered human remains hidden inside large planters at a property on Mallory Crescent, where MacArthur stored equipment. Andrew Kinsman was among the victims later identified. Over time, the remains of at least 8 men were recovered. The investigation grew into one of the largest forensic operations in Toronto's history, involving thousands of exhibits, digital evidence, and searches of more than 100 locations. What once seemed impossible, a man vanishing without explanation, was revealed to be part of something far larger, concealed in plain sight. In 2019, Bruce MacArthur pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. The case prompted widespread reflection on how vulnerable individuals can disappear even in modern cities, and how long truth can remain hidden despite technology, witnesses, and proximity. Andrew Kinsman's disappearance became a turning point, forcing law enforcement and the public to confront uncomfortable realities about visibility, assumptions, and missed patterns. How many signs can exist before they finally connect into truth? And how many disappearances seem fake until they no longer are? Story 4. On a stormy night in 1980, a man left a handwritten note for his parents. In it, he calmly explained that he was leaving Earth to board an alien spacecraft and would return after a 42-month journey through space. Then he vanished. At first glance, the story sounds impossible, more like science fiction than a missing person case. But police reports, physical evidence, and eyewitness accounts confirm that Granger Taylor was real and that he truly disappeared. Granger Taylor was born in 1948 and raised on Vancouver Island near Duncan, British Columbia. He left school after grade 8, but those who knew him described him as exceptionally gifted with machinery. From a young age, Granger demonstrated unusual mechanical ability. As a teenager, he built a functioning car from spare parts. In his early 20s, he restored a derelict steam locomotive that professionals had deemed beyond repair, hauling it out of the forest piece by piece and making it run again. He later rebuilt a World War II fighter plane and sold it to a collector. Socially, Granger was quiet and solitary. He spent much of his time alone, working on machines and reading technical manuals and science fiction. Over time, he developed a fascination with space travel and unidentified flying objects, an interest that would later define how his disappearance was remembered. By the late 1970s, Granger had constructed a large, saucer-shaped structure on his parents' property. Built from satellite dishes and scrap metal, it served as a workshop and personal retreat. Inside were books, tools, notes, and everyday furnishings. Friends and neighbors viewed the structure as an eccentric project, unusual but not threatening. Granger continued his routines, worked with machinery, and remained in contact with his family. Then, in the weeks before his disappearance, he began telling people that he believed he had been contacted, not physically, but through dreams, and that he had been chosen for a journey. No evidence exists that anyone else shared or validated this belief. On November 29, 1980, a powerful storm struck Vancouver Island. That evening, Granger visited his favorite diner and told staff he was going to meet the aliens. No one took the statement seriously. At home, Granger left a note taped to his parents' bedroom door. It stated that he had departed to board an alien ship, would be gone for 42 months, and would no longer need his possessions. He signed it calmly and left behind a hand-drawn map. He then drove away in his Datsun pickup truck. He was never seen again. At the time, investigators had no evidence of what happened, which is why the disappearance sounded impossible. The note immediately overshadowed everything else. The idea of an alien pickup was so extraordinary that it dominated public attention, even as police treated the case as a missing person investigation. Searches found no sign of Granger or his truck. Months passed, years followed. Then, in 1986, forestry workers discovered a blast site on Mount Prevost. Scattered debris matched Granger's pickup truck. Nearby, investigators found bone fragments and remnants of clothing, consistent with what Granger had been wearing. Granger was familiar with explosives, and some dynamite had gone missing the night he disappeared. However, forensic Forensic technology at the time could not conclusively identify the remains or determine intent. No official cause of death was ever confirmed. Some investigators believed the explosion was accidental, others believed it was intentional, and some family members never accepted either explanation. What made the case endure wasn't proof of anything extraordinary, but how a very real disappearance became framed by one extraordinary claim. Remove the note, and the case becomes a man, a storm, explosives, and an isolated mountainside. Add the note back in, and it becomes one of the strangest missing person cases in Canadian history. Did the story distract from the evidence? And how often does a single detail make a real disappearance sound unreal? Story 5. In the early 1970s, Shelagh McDonald was widely seen as one of the most promising voices in British folk music. She had released 2 critically praised albums, worked with some of the era's most respected musicians, and was in the middle of recording her 3rd. Then, without warning, she vanished. No goodbye, no public statement, no final performance. For decades, no confirmed sightings and no explanation. To fans and collaborators alike, it seemed as if she had simply ceased to exist. Shelagh McDonald didn't disappear in the traditional sense. She disappeared from the world. Shelagh McDonald was born in 1948 in Edinburgh and later moved to Glasgow with her family. Privately educated, she went on to study at the Glasgow School of Art. Quiet, introspective, and musically gifted, she gravitated toward songwriting and acoustic guitar rather than the spotlight. By the late 1960s, she had entered the London folk scene, where her voice drew comparisons to Joni Mitchell and Sandy Denny. Producers and musicians saw her as a rising star with a distinctive, emotionally restrained style. Her debut album, the Shelagh McDonald Album, 1970, featured backing from respected folk and rock musicians. Her second album, Stargazer, 1971, expanded her reputation further and was seen as a clear step forward. A 3rd album was already underway. On December 7th, 1971, Shelagh McDonald entered the recording studio to work on new material. That was the last time anyone in the music industry heard from her. Phone calls went unanswered. Letters were returned or ignored. Her contact number was disconnected. Producers, collaborators, and friends tried to locate her and failed. At the time, investigators had no evidence of what happened, which is why the disappearance sounded impossible. There were no reports to police, no missing person notice, just silence. Most disappearances involve urgency, searches, witnesses, timelines. This one had none of that. Shelagh McDonald didn't vanish overnight from a street or a home. She vanished slowly, quietly, and completely from public view. Rumors filled the void. Some believed she had fled the country. Others assumed she had died. Some thought she had changed her name and started over. None of these claims could be confirmed. As years turned into decades, the story took on a mythic quality, a gifted artist swallowed whole by the era that created her. In 2005, more than 30 years later, an article about McDonald's disappearance appeared in the British press. It caught the attention of one person in particular, Shelagh McDonald herself. She walked into a newspaper office and identified herself. For the first time, she explained what had happened. She described suffering a severe LSD-induced psychological breakdown in the early 1970s, one that left her paranoid, hallucinating, and unable to function normally. Her singing voice was damaged and performing became impossible. Out of self-preservation, she withdrew entirely. She returned to Scotland, lived quietly with her parents, and later adopted a nomadic life with her partner, moving from place to place, sometimes living in tents, surviving on welfare, and avoiding public attention. There had been no plan to disappear, only a need to escape. For decades, Shelagh McDonald remained unknown, even to those who loved her music. She did not claim royalties. She did not respond to inquiries. Her parents died without knowing what had become of her. After her partner's death in 2012, McDonald cautiously reconnected with the music world. In 2013, she performed publicly for the first time in over 40 years. She later recorded new material and made small, low-key appearances. She was alive, but the years she had vanished were gone forever. Shelagh McDonald's case unsettles not because of violence or mystery, but because it shows how completely a person can vanish without leaving a trace. No crime, no official search, no closure, just silence. Each case sounded fake for a different reason, too public, too ordinary, too impossible, or too strange to believe. At the time, investigators had no clear evidence of what happened, only stories that didn't make sense. And sometimes, it's the disappearances that feel unreal, that leave the deepest questions behind. This is Vanished Stories, where the missing are never forgotten.